It's 7 p.m. Thursday, August 29th, here in Seoul.
Coming up on News Center tonight. Korea's Supreme Court dismisses a lower court rulings on the bribery cases of ousted President Park Geun-hye, her confidant Choi Soon-sil, and Samsung heir apparent Lee Jae-yong. We'll tell you what this means.
The Jaein administration drafts a budget for next year worth more than 500 trillion won, or some $400 billion. It's a 9% increase with a big boost in defense, diplomacy and support for the economy.
Officials from the foreign ministries of Korea and Japan hold talks in Seoul, but fail to iron out their differences. But the culture ministers of both nations agree on the need to boost cultural exchanges.
And President Moon urges Japan to be honest about its past, something he says Tokyo has never done. On Japan's trade restrictions, he says they're actually making Korea grow stronger. News Center begins now.
Good evening and welcome to Arirang News Center. Live from Seoul, I'm Han-daeun.
And I'm Noadam. Thank you for joining us. Only one place to start really tonight. South Korea's Supreme Court has delivered its final verdict today on the corruption scandal that led to the impeachment and imprisonment of former President Park Geun-hye. The
top court sent back the cases to a lower court for a retrial, and it's widely believed that both Park and Lee will face heavier sentences, as it ruled a larger sum of Lee's donations constitute as bribes for his political gains. Arirang's Jae-yong has our top story.
The Supreme Court has found Samsung Vice Chairman Lee Jae-yong guilty of 2 counts of bribery for the 3 horses and $1.3 million he gave to former President Park Geun-hye's confidant Choi Soon-sil. He will sit for a retrial at the appeals court. The Supreme Court also asked the appeals court to review Park's prison sentence again because she was given a combined sentence for bribery and corruption, while the law requires separate sentences for public officials convicted of bribe-taking. That means Park will likely get another prison sentence at the appeals court. For Park's confidant Choi Soon-sil, the court says the charge that she extorted money from local companies is not clearly proven, and it asked the lower court to review those charges again. At retrial, she's likely to get her prison sentence reduced. While all of those involved in the corruption scandal will go through a retrial at the appeals courts, all eyes are on Lee Jae-yong, as he is likely to face a prison sentence this time. And watchers speculate this may push South Korea's largest tech giant into an extended period of difficulties amid the simmering trade tensions between South Korea and Japan. Jae-yong, Arirang News.
The people of Korea showed mixed reactions to the Supreme Court ruling. Our Won Jung-hwan was out on the streets to hear what citizens thought about the final verdict of their ousted leader and de facto Samsung leader Lee Jae-yong.
South Korea's top court said former President Park Geun-hye's charges of corruption should be separate from charges such as abuse of authority, so that's why they've been sent back to the lower court. Separate charges of Park could mean a lengthier prison term because when charges are combined, like they had been, defendants don't typically get the maximum sentence for each one. Her supporters are furious.
I think it's the wrong decision. We think this verdict is meaningless because we know that in the past 3 years of investigation, there's been not a single bit of evidence that President Park accepted money from anyone.
We had a little hope for the Supreme Court, but once again we saw the truth that country's judiciary works for the Moon Jae-in administration. It's just painful to see the court trying to tie President Park's charges to bribery.
But some welcomed the decision.
I should see the whole text, but I believe the lower court had some procedural problems in the first place, so I'm fine with the result.
I don't know how the law works, but for a generation, we believe it's important to reveal the misdeeds of the former president since it was a massive case that changed the country. I am personally in favor of increasing the former president's sentence.
The Supreme Court also sent back to the lower court the corruption cases involving Samsung's Lee Jae-yong. Reversing the earlier decision, the 3 horses and equestrian training Lee procured for the daughter of Choi Soon-sil and funds for a children's sports foundation run by the Choi's family are now considered bribes. But when asked what they think about the impact on the country's biggest conglomerate, already facing headwinds, the answer was crystal clear.
If Lee gets a harsher sentence, it will inevitably affect the country's economy. But even if there is an economic issue right now, establishing principle in terms of penalties will be helpful in the long run.
Experts are anticipating that today's decision will lead to harsher sentences for Park and Lee, who are at the heart of this massive corruption scandal. 원정환, Arirang News.
So South Korea's highest court overturned part of an appeals court ruling in the bribery case of Samsung Group's de facto chief Lee Jae-yong, who had been given a 2.5-year suspended sentence. Our Kim Hae-sung now tells us what this means for Samsung and how the company plans to weather the storm.
The order by South Korea's Supreme Court that Samsung Electronics Vice Chairman Lee Jae-yong be retried for bribery has revived uncertainties at the country's biggest company. Lee Jae-yong again faces the possibility of prison time, having previously served a year after his arrest in February 2017. He was released in 2018 on appeal after the Seoul High Court halved his 5-year sentence and suspended it for 4 years. Following the Supreme Court's ruling, Samsung Electronics released an official statement saying that it deeply regrets that this case has created concerns across society and that it'll renew its commitment to carrying out the role of a responsible company and not repeat past mistakes. In its first statement on the case, Samsung Electronics added that it has faced difficulties from external and internal uncertainties and has been constrained in preparing for future businesses. It asked for public support to overcome the challenges and continue to contribute to the local economy. Samsung has been affected by global trade turmoil, including the U.S.-China trade war and Japan's trade restrictions on key parts and materials to Korea. It also faces falling profits from a memory chip downturn and sluggish demand for smartphones. With its affiliate Samsung Biologics under investigation for accounting fraud, Thursday's ruling cast doubt on Samsung Group's governance restructuring. It could also delay major business decision-making processes, including future investment in industries like AI and the Internet of Things. Samsung Electronics has not made any high-profile mergers or acquisitions since 2017. Kim Hae-sung, Arirang News.
So let's take a closer look at the Supreme Court ruling with the help from an expert. And for that, I'm pleased to be joined by Mr. Kim Jichang, law professor at Korea University's Law School. Professor Kim, thank you very much for coming in today.
Hi, thank you.
So, as we've been hearing, the top court has ordered a retrial of bribery cases of former President Park, confidant Choi Soon-sil, and most notably Samsung heir apparent Lee Jae-yong. Can you break down for us what this means and maybe the reasoning behind the latest ruling?
I think first of all, for those who are not familiar with Korean criminal procedure, it is important to understand that under Korean law, not only the defendant, but also the prosecution may appeal. So in this case, both sides appealed. And the Supreme Court ruled that the lower court's decision, there were some errors. And then the court remanded the case back to the appellate court, back to the lower court. But overall, it was the prosecution who prevailed, in the sense that all three defendants, well, at least Lee Jae-yong and Park Geun-hye, their situation is somewhat worse than before. In the case of Choi Soon-sil, slightly better than before, but it seems that more or less the same for Choi Soon-sil. But for Mr. Lee and for former President Park, today's Supreme Court ruling is not a very good news for them.
Now, talking about those so-called errors that the lower court had made, the Supreme Court said that there were a couple of cases where they said did actually constitute bribes, where the lower court didn't include them. Those including 3 horses worth millions of dollars given by Samsung to Choi Soon-sil's daughter for her equestrian training, because she was her daughter was an equestrian athlete, as well as a separate donation by the firm to Choi Soon-sil's somewhat shady sports foundation or organization. That was set up by President Seoul. All in all, the top court says that he should be charged with just over $4 million more worth of bribes. So they're saying the lower court's decision that weren't bribes are now should be considered bribes. What are your thoughts on that? And do you think this will mean he has any chance of going back to jail?
Those two issues, one is whether the money given for the horses constituted bribe. The other is money given to this organization constituted bribe. These two issues, the lower court's rulings differed. The very first instance court found that they constituted bribe. At the appellate court level, the court found that that did not constitute bribe. Now, the Supreme Court obviously does not deal with fact-finding. Supreme Court bases its ruling on the facts found by the appellate court, ultimately. And the Supreme Court analyzed that those facts in law constituted bribe. Therefore, the appellate court committed an error of law. They should have ruled that on the basis of those facts, they should have ruled the Jae-yong guilty of bribery. So that was the ruling about Jae-yong. Now, whether that means Jae-yong now faces actual jail sentence, at the moment, Jae-yong is under suspended jail sentence. Now that the amount of bribery was substantially increased, and then if some or most of those money were found to be not Mr. Lee's personal money, but Samsung's corporate money, then Jae-yong will also have to face embezzlement charges as well. So just roughly speaking, I think there is slightly, or depending on how you see it, significantly increased possibility that at the new trial, Jae-yong might have to face actual imprisonment sentencing. But then everything is still open, and it all depends on the appellate court's finding.
All right. I wish we do have a few more questions, but I'm afraid we've run out of time for the time being. But you will be coming back for News in Depth after our newscast, so don't go too far. In the meantime, thank you for your insights.
Thank you.
The Moon administration has announced its spending plan for next year, hoping to boost the economy and mitigate the trade restrictions introduced by Japan. Our Hong Yu takes a look at the budget overall.
The Ministry of Economy and Finance said Thursday that the government will increase the 2020 budget bill by 9.3% to around $423 billion. It's the first time since the global financial crisis that the budget bill has seen an increase of 9% for 2 consecutive years as part of efforts to boost the domestic economy. In particular, the government showed its determination to counter Japan's export curbs in South Korea by fostering local production of strategic materials and items, which will be backed by a 17.3% increase in the budget set aside for R&D.
The 2020 budget bill has been drafted to be as expansionary as possible to show the government's strong determination to revitalize the domestic economy. We will invest heavily in new industries to help accelerate innovative growth and boost innovation across the economy.
The ministry expects next year's gross income to amount to nearly $397 billion, up by 1.2% from this year. To fund the spending increase despite an expected 0.9% decrease in national tax income, the government will issue the biggest ever deficit covering bond of around $49.5 billion.
The South Korean economy needs a solution for a structural problem, but instead, using a financial solution to boost the economy can pile up national debt to a level that cannot be handled by the government and cannot be recovered, just like what happened in Japan.
The lion's share of next year's budget, around $149.6 billion, is to be injected into the health, welfare, and labor sectors, from which $21.2 billion will be used for solely labor. Government spending in labor will be 21% higher than this year in an effort to expand labor market policies that reinforce workers' wage insurance and job training. The Trade Ministry says it seeks to revitalize exports with a 27.5% increase, resulting in a largest ever $19.6 billion budget for trade, industry, and energy. The budget proposal is to be submitted to the National Assembly next Tuesday for approval. Hong Yu, Arirang News.
So, next year's budget will see a big boost to spending on defence and diplomacy, and there's a lot of work in particular that needs to be done in foreign affairs, which the budget reflects. Lee-ji-won explains.
South Korea's defense ministry is seeking a $41 billion budget for 2020, a 7.4% increase on this year's budget. It's the first time the budget would break the 50 trillion Korean won mark, which the ministry says is significant, as it is getting slightly closer to the defense budgets of Seoul's neighbors. There's a big focus on the improvement of defense capabilities, which takes up a third of the entire budget. And in that spending, the ministry has allocated $12 billion to advance weapon systems and technology, including plans to take a leading response against threats from nuclear weapons and weapons of mass destruction. The ministry said it also plans to invest in the improvement of a large-scale transport ship. And in an effort to develop the local defense industry, the ministry also plans to raise its research and development budget by 20.7% to $3.2 billion. More has also been allocated to improve soldiers' basic wages and conditions. For example, a surgeon who now receives $335 a month will be getting $446 next year if all goes as planned. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs is looking for an 11.5% budget hike, bringing its budget for 2020 to $2.25 billion. The hike is more than double the increase the ministry has seen in recent years, as South Korea's diplomacy faces many challenges. The ministry will allocate $1.4 million on boosting its government, public, and private sector analysis network to prepare for the risks from political changes, especially the U.S.-China trade war. It'll also spend $4.2 million, a 330% increase on strengthening its diplomatic network with and within Japan, including hosting forums and inviting high-level figures. The ministry also announced plans to raise its funding for international organizations and for official development assistance by $134 million to $1.17 billion. The Unification Ministry aims to have its budget raised to $1.18 billion. While the budget for general accounting, which includes helping North Korean defectors and preparing for inter-Korean summits, saw a slight decrease, the Fund for Inter-Korean Joint Projects went up over 10% to $1 billion. This includes forestation projects, humanitarian aid, and the efforts to link and modernize railways and roads between the two sides. Through these, the Unification Ministry says it seeks to focus on realizing inter-Korean economic cooperation and growing consensus on the peace process. Lee-ji-won, Arirang News.
President Moon Jae-in has told Japan that it needs to be honest about its past crimes. The process of self-reflection, he says, is never over. As for next year's budget, Moon said Japan's recent trade curbs have in fact solidified the path the Korean economy will take. Shin Se-min has this report.
President Moon Jae-in said Japan needs to be honest, coming out hard against the Japanese government's efforts to link historical issues to economic matters, calling such an attitude disingenuous.
일본은 정직해야 합니다. 일본 정부가 어떤 이유로 변명하든 과거사 문제를 경제 문제와 연계시킨 것이 분명한데도 대단히 솔직하지 못한 태도라 하지 않을 수 없습니다.
Speaking during a cabinet meeting Thursday to review the government's budget plan for next year, President Moon said the attitude of the Japanese government towards historical issues has never been honest, and its reluctance to either acknowledge or repent for its wrongdoings only aggravates the wounds of the victims.
과거를 기억하고 성찰한다는 것은 끝이 없는 일입니다. 한 번 반성을 말했으니 반성은 끝났다거나 한 번 합의했으니 과거는 모두 지나갔다는 식으로 끝낼 수 있는 일이 아닙니다.
The president sent a clear warning to Japan, even saying it should take lessons from Germany that earned the trust of the international community through its acceptance and sorrow for its past. It's the first time the president has used the term honest in the 2-month period since Japan first initiated its trade restrictions against South Korea, to which Seoul responded last week by ending the bilateral military information sharing agreement with Japan. Pressing Japan over its offensive attitude toward its historical wrongdoings, the president added the South Korean government's budget next year took multiple factors, both internal and external, to devise the record budget of over $423 billion. Moon promised to help minimize the damage suffered by local firms as a result of the export curbs and reiterated that the country would use this challenge as an opportunity to step up. He added Japan's unreasonable trade restrictions have also solidified the path that the South Korea will take in the future. Stressing the importance that the fiscal measures will play in the year 2020, the president said the expansionary budget will help create a foundation for Korea to become an unshakable nation. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Foreign ministry officials from South Korea and Japan met in Seoul earlier today. While this is a regular meeting both sides have once every few months, it comes at a critical time when the two neighbours are locking horns over diplomatic and trade issues. On the same day, culture ministers from both countries also sat down for talks. Yoon Jung-min with the details.
Foreign ministry officials from South Korea and Japan met in Seoul on Thursday for the first time since Tokyo removed Seoul from its whitelist of trusted trading partners. The Foreign Ministry's Director General for Asian and Pacific Affairs, Kim Jichang, sat down with his Japanese counterpart, Kenji Kanasugi, for bilateral talks. Seoul's foreign ministry said the two sides discussed a range of issues, including the forced labor issue. Kim expressed regret over Japan removing South Korea from its whitelist and asked Tokyo to reverse the decision, while once again urging dialogue. The official also delivered Seoul's concerns over Japan's plan to discharge contaminated water from Fukushima into the Pacific Ocean and asked for updates on the matter. Kanasugi, meanwhile, expressed regret over Seoul's decision to end the military intel sharing pact with Tokyo and asked Seoul to reconsider. The Japanese diplomat also met his other counterpart on nuclear negotiations, Lee Do-hun, after the meeting with Seoul's foreign ministry. On the same day, the culture ministers from Seoul and Tokyo also met for talks. South Korean Culture Minister Park Kyung-woo sat down with his Japanese counterpart Masahiko Shibayama for bilateral talks in Incheon. The talks were held ahead of the annual three-way culture and tourism meeting between Seoul, Beijing, and Tokyo, which will be held on Friday. Though it is a difficult time for Seoul-Tokyo relations in terms of diplomacy and trade, both ministers agreed on the need for cultural exchanges between citizens and discussed ways to promote cultural events. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
Japan's Ministry of Finance announced on Thursday that the volume of etching gas exported from Tokyo to Seoul plunged by 83.7% in July compared to the previous month. According to Asahi Shimbun, around $3.8 million of the gas was exported in July, down 32.6% compared to June. The sharp drop is seen as a result of Japan's export restrictions on fluorinated polyamides, photoresist, and etching gas, which are used for the production of chips and displays for smartphones and TVs. The restrictions took effect on July 4th. Kyodo News Agency reported that Japan's finance ministry did not have statistics on fluorinated polyamides and photoresist. President Moon Jae-in will be heading to Southeast Asia this Sunday. In 3 different countries, he'll be promoting practical cooperation with the region as part of his new Southern policy. Our Jae-yong reports.
President Moon Jae-in heads to Southeast Asia this Sunday for a week-long trip to Thailand, Myanmar, and Laos, a trip aimed at firming up relations with the 3 nations as well as promoting shared growth.
Thailand, Myanmar, and Laos are key pillars of President Moon's new southern policy aimed at expanding diplomatic and economic prospects.
The president's first stop, an official visit to Thailand for 3 days starting the 1st of September. He'll be the first South Korean president to officially touch down in Thailand since 2012. The presidential office said that during the visit, Moon will give a keynote speech at a jointly held business forum on the Fourth Industrial Revolution. The trip will also include efforts to build ties in the science and high-tech industries. From the 3rd of September until the 5th, the president will be on a state visit to Myanmar, the first in 7 years by a Korean leader. President Moon will meet with Myanmar's state councillor and Nobel Peace Prize laureate Aung San Suu Kyi and her counterpart Win Myint. They'll discuss their bilateral partnership on sustainable win-win growth and systematic support for more Korean firms to do business in Myanmar. The final stop on the tour is Laos, and that visit will be a first state visit to Laos by a South Korean leader. Visiting what's known as the Battery of Southeast Asia, the president will discuss solidifying partnerships in infrastructure, agriculture, healthcare, and hydroelectric power. Also during his stay, the president will hold a series of meetings with President Bunhong Borachith and Prime Minister Thongloun Sisleyith.
Through the visit, the president hopes to solidify cooperation for a successful South Korea-ASEAN summit, as well as the inaugural Korea-Mekong summit this November.
The presidential office added that through his tour of the 3 Southeast Asian nations, the president will have completed his promise of visiting all 10 ASEAN member nations during his term. Jae-yong, Arirang News.
North Korea's rubber-stamp parliament gathered in Pyongyang today for the second time this year, and much attention is focused on what the North's leadership will discuss and perhaps more importantly, announce. Our Unification Ministry correspondent Oh Jung-hee has more.
North Korea's parliament, the Supreme People's Assembly, is gathering for the second time this year on Thursday. The assembly usually gathers once a year in April, and it's rare for the meeting to be held 2 times a year. During the past 10 years, the North convened its parliament twice within 12 months, in 2010, 2012, and 2014. Seoul's Unification Ministry says that the North would evaluate projects it's been working on and set up plans.
In previous Supreme People's Assembly meetings, the North revised lower statutes of its constitution and made personnel reshuffles. It also assessed progress on its 5-year economic development plan and discussed future policy directions.
The timing of this rare second annual meeting draws attention. Although North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and U.S. President Donald Trump agreed to resume denuclearization talks in July, and Kim later reconfirmed that through a letter to Trump earlier this month, there are still no signs of working-level negotiations between the two sides. In the meantime, Pyongyang fired over a dozen of projectiles into the East Sea and lashed out at Seoul and Washington for their military drills. Eyes fall on whether Kim Jong-un will make a speech at the parliament to clarify his stance, just like he did at the session in April.
At the last Supreme People's Assembly, the North sent out a message about its relations with the U.S., considering that we are keeping a close eye on the upcoming meeting.
In April's session, the North re-elected Kim Jong-un as the chairman of the State Affairs Commission and officialized him as the ceremonial leader of the state as well. The North also modified its constitution and made reshuffles in its power structure. At Thursday's meeting, watchers say there could be some additional reshuffles in Kim's cabinet and new legislations to follow through the 5-year economic development plan due next year. Oh Jung-hee, Arirang News.
North Korea appears to be building a new ballistic missile submarine and making preparations for a test launch. Analyzing satellite photos of Sinpo South shipyard taken on Monday, Joseph Bermudez and Victor Cha of Beyond Parallel, a research project funded by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, confirmed reports by North Korean state media of a, quote, newly built submarine. The photos show support vessels and a crane that could be used to tow a barge out to sea for a submarine launch test. However, the analysts say it's unclear when or if a test could happen, citing a lack of conclusive evidence right now. The gap between the 2-year and 30-year US Treasury yields, a closely followed recession indicator, inverted further on Wednesday. After inverting for the first time on August 14th, the spread widened further to 6.2 basis points, mainly on concerns about the escalating US-China trade war. The yield curve is considered inverted when long-term bonds see their returns fall below those of short-term bonds. According to Credit Suisse, the last 5 inverted yield curves over the past 50 years all led to recessions that happened an average of 22 months following the first inversion. The head of UNESCO says a decision to list the so-called comfort women archives on its Memory of the World Register is up to South Korea and Japan. In an interview with Tokyo-based Kyodo news agency, Audrey Azoulay said, quote, "We count on their cooperation to achieve sustainable solutions." She added that reducing political tensions is essential for UNESCO to focus on its mandate and says she wants to respect the wishes of both parties. Regarding the US and Israel's withdrawal from UNESCO last year following accusations that the organization was anti-Semitic, Azoulay emphasized that it has implemented reforms like requiring a unanimous vote on decisions regarding the Middle East. South Korea's Oceans Ministry has released 14 endangered sea turtles into the ocean from Jeju Island. Of them, 4 turtles were rescued, 3 were hatched artificially, and the rest came from abroad for research. Wednesday's event was joined by nearly 100 people, including the minister, representatives of related organizations and citizens. The move comes amid enhanced international awareness on the need to preserve sea turtles that are on the verge of extinction. That has been your 3-minute news flash.
Autumn rain has been drenching the nation all day today, and more rain is expected.
For more details, let's turn to our Michelle Park, like we do at the Weather Center. Michelle.
Good evening, guys. Now, the long strip of rain clouds has formed and is moving easterly across the peninsula. Now, although we are seeing a pause in the rain, it's expected to rain on and off throughout the evening in the inland regions with thundery skies and of up to 40 millimeters of rain. And Friday afternoon will be a cloudy one with some isolated showers as well. And Korea will be a lot cooler than Beijing, hovering in the high 20s. And cooler air from the north will travel further south, bringing a cooler morning tomorrow. The lows in Seoul, Daejeon, Daegu, and also for Gwangju are expected to drop to 20 degrees Celsius, while Gyeongju and Chuncheon are lower at 19 and 18 degrees respectively. And under cloudy skies, Seoul will top to 27 degrees, while the southern regions will be rising a bit higher into the afternoon. And sunny skies will appear during the weekend. However, starting Sunday, the southern regions and Jeju will see consecutive days of autumn showers. I'll leave you with the weather conditions around the world.
That will do it for this edition of Arirang News. Thank you, as always, for watching.
News in Depth is next.